I ate 6 meals in one day. Well, technically it was 5.5 meals, but I only took insulin for 3 of them and yet still maintained 99% time in range over the course of 2 days. And the 1% that's missing was a fake low from my CGM. So technically it was 100% time in range and only covering 3 out of my 5.5 meals. Now, before we get into this topic, I do need to preface this entire episode with this is not medical advice. Okay. We'll just call it speculation. Don't listen to what I say. Do whatever your doctor tells you. I don't want to get into trouble on this, but I will be laying out the exact process and 3 different reasons I was able to eat my favorite foods without insulin and 0 spikes in blood sugar. If you don't know who I am, my name is Matt Vandevecht. I am a certified master fitness trainer and nutritionist. I live with type 1 diabetes, and as such, I actually challenged myself to compete in a triathlon sprint coming up in less than 2 weeks at the time of recording this. And we're going to get some stories today and explain how I was able to eat food with no insulin and no spikes. So before we get into the stories, we're going to jump into our theme song, and I got a special surprise for you. Let's jump in. I've spent the last 10 years pushing the limits while identifying trends and patterns in my type 1 diabetes management. Follow along as I learn, apply, and share the fitness, nutrition, and lifestyle strategies that I've learned from diabetes experts around the world. The real question is, how can we live fearlessly with diabetes while maintaining stable blood sugars? This podcast is here to give you the answer. My name is Matt Vandevecht, head coach and co-founder of FTF Warrior, and welcome to Pardon My Pancreas. Whew. So we are 2 weeks away from this triathlon sprint that I have been training for months. It's been an exciting journey. A lot of you have been following, have been able to track my progress and see that literally every single workout I have ever done for this triathlon sprint, I have been 100% time in range. There is a reason for that, and there's something I use, I'll explain later in this episode, to predict and stabilize blood sugars to keep them there where I want them. But what I also wanted to share in today's episode is this crazy anomaly that I realized only after the fact, that I ate almost 6 entire meals and only half of them were covered with insulin. Now, the first one being that I am 2 weeks away from this triathlon sprint. It's the first one I've ever done, completely new to me. I've never even considered this before. To be fair, I didn't even know what an official triathlon consisted of when I said yes to doing this. It was literally just to challenge myself and prove that I could, maybe inspire some other people along the way. And as I'm training for this, I'm realizing how demanding a multi-sport event actually is. So yesterday, I took my dad out to the actual event location. I said, "Hey, Dad, I need to do an actual full-length run-through to track my blood sugars. I want to be confident that I'm able to compete in this event and not have to worry about blood sugars." So we went to the event location. Now, for those of you who don't know, a triathlon is a swim followed by a bike followed by a run. And it's just bam, 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 right after each other. Thankfully, I had requested that he bring my wetsuit because the water, as it turns out, didn't even know this, is 57 degrees, which is very, very cold. And so I'm hopping in. There's a whole story I'll say for a different day, but it was ice cold. Came into face some new fears that I didn't know I had with open water, but completed it nonetheless. Now, this entire event, I did complete. I'm very happy about that. Blood sugars, in fact, I'll put them right here, put them right there. That was my graph over the course of the entire event. I think it was like an hour, 45 minutes, something like that. 100% time in range, but also managed to stay between, I think it was like 94 and 127. You probably see it on the graph better than I can right now, just for recalling it. But that's the kind of control that I'm after, even with multi-sport, really intense activity over the course of time. Now, part of my strategy specifically and how it ties into today's episode is I don't want to lose weight. So I'm looking for ways to add food into my lifestyle, right? Yes, I can take more insulin at mealtime, but instead of making adjustments to my insulin, which is what some of my clients prefer, so that you don't have extra calories and lead to fake fat gain, right? Instead of doing that, I opt for the other side of what we call the 80-20 blood sugar formula, where I calculate exactly how many carbs I need during the activity. But here's the tricky part. It's not just carbs. It's carbs and fats and proteins and fiber. You got to take it all into consideration because it will affect the digestion and absorption rates of those foods. Prime example, if I eat scrambled eggs before going for a run, it's going to have a very different impact on my blood sugars than if I were to drink a fruit smoothie, right? Or drink some orange juice. Very different response. They might have the same calories, but the calorie sources coming from fats and proteins versus carbs, especially faster acting carbs, will yield a different CGM graph. Hopefully that makes sense so far. Now, during the course of my triathlon training, I've identified my specific burn rate, and this is something that we might have to go into on a different episode as well, but essentially identifying what my body burns. And there's a couple different ways to look at this. One is through burning of the bloodstream sugars, burning of your muscle tissue, muscle glycogen essentially is what's being released, but understanding how the body has to replenish that and we have to supply the replenishing glucose to go back into the muscles, right? There's a lot of different ways to calculate these things, but the first calculation to be made is how many carbs do I need to replace the carbs that are being burned, right? And technically you're not burning carbs, you're burning glucose, but I'm trying to simplify the equations for you, right? So the first entire meal, I ended up consuming, get this, 85 grams of carbs. I was feeling good. I felt full afterwards. Now, this wasn't just after, of course, I ate before, during, and after very specific types of snacks, types of fuels, and timed at specific increments to keep that level graph that you guys saw. I'll put it up here again so you can see what we're looking at. You can probably see a few of the rises and falls that are in there, even though they're only like 10 or 15 point rise or fall. That's because of the introduction of faster acting sugars. Now, I also had fats and proteins mixed in. I also had electrolytes. There's a lot of math that goes into keeping a graph this stable. This is why a lot of people have a struggle when exercising. They can't figure out how to stay in range. Oftentimes, either they plummet or they eat too much food and they skyrocket, or the timing is off and it's up and down, up and down. It's a science, and it is quite literally a math equation. Like, this is what I walk my clients through. I'm obsessed with diabetes math. It's how I do everything that I do. I love it. But that was the first entire meal. So all in all, that was hundreds and hundreds of calories that I was able to consume, which is good because I'll put it right here as well. As you can see, I burned over 1,200 calories from that exercise. I was really pushing it and it felt good. But the first meal, uncovered, there was a lot of calories consumed because I was exercising. So this can be for endurance activities. This can be for playtime. This could be running errands, right? If you want to use calories to replace the calories burned, you can use that as somebody with type 1 diabetes, right? Now, the other side of that, of course, is making adjustments to insulin. It could be adapting with a different formula side of things we teach our clients. But in today's example, I'm sharing my story, which was I wanted to eat food, so I calculated how much I could eat. Boom, full meal, done. Second meal was breakfast. I did dose for that. That one was also delicious. It was like an hour later. Beyond breakfast, between breakfast and lunch, I think it was. Nope, it was after lunch. So breakfast, then I went to celebrate both of my sisters' birthdays because they were born April 16 and 17, even though they were 3 years apart. It's just kind of funny. It was not planned. We found out yesterday that the timing of that just happened. But the post-lunch meal, this was largely comprised of proteins, fats, and fibers. Now, the reason that those types of foods are important is that they have lower impact overall, but also this was me proactively planning for an increase of insulin sensitivity. See, I did an intense workout. I went swimming, open water. I went bike riding a lot. I went for a run when I really didn't want to, and they were stacked on top of each other. So I like to walk through my clients this process we call it stacking of insulin sensitivity, or insulin sensitivity stacking. You've probably heard of insulin stacking, right? Where you take too much insulin too many times and you come crashing down, This could also be called a rage bolus. When you see a high blood sugar, it's just not moving. You give insulin, nothing happens. You give more insulin, nothing happens. You give more insulin, and then you're crashing because you weren't patient enough to wait for it, right? It's dangerous. Don't do it. But similar to insulin stacking, we have insulin sensitivity stacking. This could be where you have multiple events in a row. I have a client right now who has one sport in the morning, another sport in the afternoon, and those are going to stack because it's 2 events in one day. The body's not used to it. So we see that there's an increase of insulin sensitivity. Basically, that means that the insulin that we use is going to be used more efficiently, and our ratios and rates can change, where we might need less insulin for the same amounts of food. Now, instead of adjusting my insulin, I want more food. Remember, I burned 1,200 calories that morning. And so instead of adjusting my insulin, I used that delayed onset of insulin sensitivity peaking as an opportunity to introduce more snacks. So what I chose to do was snack on proteins, fats, and fibers throughout the day: carrots, bell peppers, cucumbers, hummus, chicken, tree nuts, walnuts. Just a fantastic spread of lots of different foods, which ended up yielding about the caloric average of a fourth meal. No, fifth, fourth. Yeah, I'm losing track. So the idea was, I knew through insulin sensitivity stacking, I would see a slow but steady decline in blood sugars. So I chose to offset that with fats, proteins, and fibers. Again, it was calculated. It was very intentional, and it was me being proactive so that I did not see a low blood sugar. That one catches a lot of people by surprise. Yes, you burn glucose during the activity, which a lot of us see. You go for a run, you see a drop in blood sugars. What a lot of people don't see, though, is that later on in the day or in the night, at very specific time intervals, you are to see a boost in insulin sensitivity depending on the types of exercise and all these other situational variables as well. But based on my day, based on my calculations, I knew with certainty, you can get to a place where diabetes actually makes sense, believe it or not. I knew that was going to happen. So I stacked this slow digesting food, these snacks throughout the afternoon, that would allow me to offset that drop. I stayed perfectly stable. Again, you saw the graph, 99% time in range. Technically it was 100, but faulty sensor kind of screwed it up. But that's what's possible. So that's the fourth meal, delayed onset of insulin sensitivity stacking. That was how I got that one going. Now, dinner time, get Chipotle. I was just really craving it. And this was the second day in a row. So now you can eat an entire Chipotle meal 2 days in a row, still have 99 to 100% time in range. It's possible, but that was amazing and very filling and enjoyable. But I was still hungry. Keep in mind, I burned how many? 1,200 calories. It was a lot of food. That I wanted to balance all those calories burnt, right? Because it's not just the calories burned you have to consider, but also your basal metabolic rate, yada, yada, yada. That's stuff from my master fitness trainer days. So the sixth meal that I didn't quite finish because I finally did get full was actually, I didn't go grocery shopping. So I went back out. The whole day we spent at my parents' house. So I ate their food. Then coming home, we had Chipotle. For another snack, I decided to go out to Jersey Mike's and grab, here's what I think it's a number 7. It's the turkey and provolone tub. So with this one, again, I went for the low impact foods. Right? We think about low glycemic, low carb count, ultimately as well. But looking at proteins, fats, fibers, and then the low glycemic carbs that I wanted to consume. So I had some cruciferous vegetables that I found in the fridge, which was broccoli, cauliflower, that sort of thing. I had turkey, provolone, lettuce, tomato, pickles, banana bell peppers, and I had it Mike's way. So there's tons of seasoning and oil and vinaigrette and whatever else, the magic stuff they put in there. Just, another full meal. I mean, the calorie consumption on that, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of calories in that little tub. And it was delicious. But like 2/3 of the way through, I was like, I'm full. It's 10 o'clock at night. I should go to bed and stop eating because rest is also critical for recovering from an activity like that. Now, you need to sleep. That's why I wear this device. This is a Whoop band. Basically, it was telling me all day yesterday. Actually, I'll put it up here. I'll put a screenshot. It was telling me, hey, you're overreaching on your strain. Basically, it's saying you worked way too hard today. You need to go to bed super early. And because I didn't do that, I had to prioritize. Anyways, long story short, there we have it, 5.5 meals. Now, the first meal was through glucose burn rates, right? I was matching it with glucose being added in. So I wanted to balance it. The second free meal ultimately was a delayed onset of insulin sensitivity stacking from the previous workout as well, because it was so intense and it was so much activity. I knew how to calculate that. And then the third one was me being wise, because the insulin sensitivity was still there, but it wasn't as significant, right? We've passed the peak. It's not going to impact me too much, especially overnight. So I wanted to look for low impact foods that would still make me feel full and still had some calories. So I did go for foods that are lower in carb, had the fats, proteins, and fibers that allowed me to continue to eat, but also not have to give additional insulin. Keep in mind, I still had my basal insulin going all day, all night, just as you would normally. However, like carb consumption, the beginning of the day, that was a lot of carbs during the event, but breakfast, lunch, and dinner, where I did actually dose for the meals, also had a lot of carbs. You're probably talking like 90 to 100-ish carbs per meal. Some people hear that, they think it's crazy. The reality is we just have to find the right equation in order to enjoy foods and activities and lifestyles that we want. Type 1 diabetes does not have to be a prison. I told you guys that at the beginning of this, I use something called the 80-20 blood sugar formula. It allows me to calculate things like my burn rate per type of activity and duration of activity. So going into a swim, then a bike, then a run, I can calculate exactly how many carbs I need, how to stabilize with proteins and fats, when to introduce those. There's a very specific plan that I can follow to have that beautiful graph, right? Whereas I used to go for just a bike ride and I'd have to push it up super high and then I would crash down and then it's a recovery and that's roller coaster blood sugars all day. There's a strategy you can follow. Now, of course, it takes effort to learn that strategy, actually set up the 80-20 blood sugar formula, which is why I walk my clients through it with them to help them to identify pitfalls to watch out for, how to set these things up in their lives, because obviously not everyone's going to be competing in a triathlon sprint, but some people have different desires. Like, I want to eat pizza and stay in range. I want to sleep through the night with no alarms. I want to have peace of mind and not obsess over my blood sugars, even though they are controlled, right? So if you're someone who hears this kind of an episode and you're like, I like the way he thinks differently, like it's not just about take insulin for your carbs. You should also consider proteins, because they have an impact on glucose. Believe it or not, they are not the great stabilizer that we are all told. They actually yield a blood sugar increase over time through a process called gluconeogenesis, right? You have to consider fats and how that might impact insulin resistance. You have to consider fiber and how you might consider dosing for that differently than you would a standard carb, right? We have starchy carbs, you have simple versus complex. There's so many different aspects to type 1. And if you're thinking this is so overwhelming, I just want to be pointed in the right direction, the best thing you can do right now as a starting point to start looking at how can I think about diabetes differently, how can I identify my own formula pieces so that I can start looking at how many carbs do I need per 10 minutes of activity, per hour, different types of activity. How do I have a day where I don't see ups and downs and all arounds, where I can see 100% time in range, even while visiting family and having ice cream cake and then going shopping and also having a workout that morning. That stuff's all possible, but you have to have the right strategies in place, right? And that's where you can go. And we actually have a free training you can go check out on my process, how I discovered the 80-20 blood sugar formula and how you might be able to apply some of those pieces on a deeper level in your own life. You can find that at diabetesinaction.com. Now, if you go there, it's just going to ask for your name and email. You'll register for the training. And on the next page, you can hit play and you have access to that training forever. you get it. So I would highly recommend going to check that out. It's going to have some out of the box ideas for you. So I want you to be open-minded, understand that like today's episode, it's changed. Diabetes as a whole has changed. It's not just an insulin to carb ratio, just like it's no longer an exchange system. We don't use the sliding scale anymore. We have an insulin to carb ratio, but now we need to start considering insulin to protein ratios and to fat ratios, looking at our activity impact ratios. All these things are covered in that training. So go check it out, diabetesinaction.com. And I would love to know your thoughts in the comments. If you could have a free meal, and what I say by free is not have to dose for it. If you had a free meal that didn't require insulin, what would be your go-to meal? If you're on YouTube, I would love to see what that meal would look like. What's the best case scenario? What is just making you drool when you think about it? A meal you wouldn't have to dose for. Give me that in the comments, and I'll read every single one of them. And then again, for that training, diabetesinaction.com. Hope you enjoyed this one. A little out of the box, a little out of the norm, but I wanted to share with you that it's not as straightforward when we consider diabetes management styles as we once thought. So I hope that triggered some epiphanies, gave you some ideas, and I'll see you next week. Have an awesome one and keep up the fight.